let me ask John to begin. Do you have uh, the documents? Do you have like the docket and the packet before
I
you?
have not before me. I downloaded them the other day. I've reviewed them briefly.
Okay, then I'll spend the time on the agenda and or on the docket.
And John, I do want to warn you that we are recording this, not for future incriminating evidence against you, but just to share with others that might be first-time commissioners. If that's okay with you.
Fine by me.
All right, thank you.
John, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Let's see. I was on the session at Second Presbyterian about 20 years ago. I'm a practicing attorney in Roanoke. That's about it. I've been experienced with church work for many, many years.
Okay, great. Are you a long-term resident of Roanoke?
Yes, I am.
Very good.
About 56 years.
Well, it ought to feel like home now.
It's starting to.
Okay. Well, Dave, I usually start these things with prayer, so let's bow our heads. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the day, for the business to come. And God, thank you for the technology that enables us to gather safely. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
David, we're all yours, friend.
All right, I was about to ask, am I starting this off?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so John, I just to reintroduce myself, I'm Reverend Dave Baker. I'm pastor at Williamson Memorial, and I've been asked by the Presbytery Council just to help with the Zoom side of things at the Presbytery meetings. And since you already know how to use Zoom in general, I'm just going to cover like one or two technical things. There's one item in particular that's really important that you know, and that's how to raise your hand. So raising your hand in a Zoom meeting, if you are on the PC, are you going to join via phone or on the PC or Mac when you are actually there this Saturday?
Unfortunately, it'll be by phone.
Okay, well, we can still, it should still be okay with phone. If you're on PC or Mac, you can push participants to see the raise hand icon. However, if you're on the phone, the only way to do it is *9. So this is how we're going to vote. This is how you're going to get get the floor if you would like to discuss something, if you feel led to make a motion or speak for or against a motion or an amendment or something along those lines. If you're going to vote, you need to be able to raise your hand. So there will be two tellers who will lower your hand in general. So if you have raised your hand, I don't know if it'll tell you on the phone. Did it tell you that you just had your hand lowered?
No, it does not.
All right. Well, I just lowered your hand. So don't worry about lowering your hand. One of the tellers, which would be Denny Casey or I, will do that. We'll lower your hand because at some points we'll need to actually count out how many hands are raised when we're voting. So we'll take care of that. But I did want to go over a couple of polity points, a couple of issues of polity, and then I'll turn it over to Carl so that he can do the actual content part. Most of our voting, hopefully, will be done via consent. So the way a consent motion normally works, of course, under Roberts is the chair will say, we're going to pass this by consent or unanimous consent. If anyone objects, do so now. So at that point, someone would be able to raise their hand and we would say, hopefully the moderators will remember to say, raise your virtual hand. You're going to be on the phone, so you're not going to try to physically raise your hand. But when we say raise your hand, we mean *9 or raising your hand from the participants menu. And raising your hand in response to a motion to pass a motion by consent would be saying, I do not want this to pass by consent. I would like us to vote. I think we need to vote on this. We need to discuss it. This is not something that should just sail through without a word spoken. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to vote against it. It just means you think that it needs discussion before just being passed. So hopefully most of our motions will proceed via consent. And in that case, we won't need to worry about how the voting actually goes and that sort of thing. However, there probably will be motions that we are not going to do by consent, that the moderator will choose not to move that they be approved by consent, but actually move into the normal order of things, which would be, making the motion. It probably is coming from a committee, so there won't be a second, and then moving to discussion of the motion. And in the case of discussion of the motion, there are tools in Zoom available to where we can say yes or no right next to where we're raising our hands. And that's something that you won't be able to have access to because you've got the, you're joining just via the phone. So the way that you'll do it is actually going to be hitting *9 again. So if you have something to say about the motion when discussion comes up, you'll hit *9 and wait to be recognized. Now, assuming that you've given the presbytery your phone number on the registration form, we will have already renamed you. So it will be apparent to those who are joining via computer who you are. But of course, when just as a general rule, whenever you address the presbytery, you should state your name, your status, your ruling elder, and the church that you're from. You're from Second Roanoke, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So you would just say John Johnson, ruling elder, Second Roanoke, and then go in, and then say, I would like to speak against the motion, or I would like to speak for the motion. Whichever way if you're for it, I'd like to speak for the motion, and then say what is on your mind, say what you think. And then the moderator will move on to the next person, hopefully somebody that is the opposite, switching off between for and against until we've kind of reached the end of the line. But if you were joining via the computer, you would be able to have a yes or a no icon to say whether you were speaking for or against the motion. So we'll see how that turns out, how that happens. Okay, so that's the long and short of how you would handle a normal motion. So after the discussion is over, the moderator will say, okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor, please raise your hand, or please raise your virtual hand. Then everybody would raise their, you'd hit *9 if you were if you were in favor of the motion. And if you were not, then you just wait patiently. So the tellers at that point, or the moderator would, depending on whether or not we were actually counting the vote, the moderator would look at the number of hands raised and just kind of, if she or he felt that the result was in doubt, then they would say, all those against, raise your hand. And in the interim, we would have lowered everybody's hands. If there needs to be a strict division of the House, actual counted vote, then we would, and anybody can request that, then the tellers would actually count that, and it would just take a lot longer to get through, but it's the same process of raising your hand. Normally in a physical meeting, we would be able to do a secret ballot, but that's not going to be possible as long as we have folks joining via phone. It's difficult to do a secret ballot unless everybody's in front of a computer or has access to email or that sort of thing. If we do end up having motions that need to be perfected, in other words, if there are amendments to motions that need to happen, we'll be throwing those up on the screen, but we'll also repeat them. The moderator will repeat the motion and the amendment and that sort of thing before we vote. So you'll just have to like really pay attention when that is happening, if it does happen. Let's see if I've got anything else here. Okay, so the only other thing that I would recommend, and I'm sure that Carl would say the same thing, there will be, as part of the packet, a list of, I think we're calling them standing rules. I'm not sure what the state clerk decided to call them, but essentially there's a list, it's a few pages long, of rules that we've adopted for the Zoom meeting. I would recommend reviewing that. The main thing to keep in mind is just remember that *9 to raise your hand. And I think if you push *9 again, it can lower your hand. The other thing to remember is *6 to mute yourself. Generally speaking, you want to be muted because who knows what's going to happen in the background. And on Zoom, as you're well aware, if your phone makes any noise, then you'll have the focus. Like the focus will go to you. And everyone will wonder why your dog is barking or something like that. So, make sure to mute yourself unless you've been recognized, and then you can unmute yourself again with *6. And I think that's, as far as phone users go, I think that is the long and short of it. Did you have any questions?
Did you want me to try to lower my hand?
Yeah, just try it. See if you, I mean, I think I've already lowered your hand. It'll probably just tell you you've raised, no, you've got it up. So yeah, try to lower it, see what happens.
Okay, so I've pressed *9 twice. Did it lower my hand?
It didn't. I thought it was *9
Okay.
again. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's *8 or something like that.
Okay.
Okay.
All righty. Well, I'll just try to keep my questions to a minimum.
Well, we'll lower your hand. I mean, don't worry about lowering your hand. I mean, it's something that if it needs to, once you've been recognized, we'll lower it for you. I was just curious. I thought that you could do that, but I'm not sure because I usually am on the PC.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, great. Well, I'll turn it over to Carl.
John, let me ask first, do you have particular questions about the day that I can address specifically?
Not really. I've been to, it's been many years, but I've been to a fair share of Presbyterian meetings. So I just follow along and do my thing.
Well, let me walk you briefly through what's happening. It's a 3.5 hour meeting that's scheduled. And that may be ambitious. It's always hard to know how much time things will take. But there is some opening business. We have to basically approve an electronic meeting so that we can proceed to have the meeting. But I'll be recognizing at the very front of end of the meeting, Rachel Shepard. She has been our transitional associate presbyter for discipleship and ministry. And her last effective day is, gosh, the 14th or the 16th of August. She has accepted a chaplain residency here in Lynchburg at Centra Hospital. And the timing is all right because the presbytery has been talking really for 3 years now about some fairly big transitions in how we do ministry and how we function as a presbytery. And that proposal will be voted upon at this meeting. So I'll be acknowledging her. We're receiving at the beginning of the meeting, we'll be receiving 4 new clergy. One is to serve at First Church Danville. One is to serve at 2 congregations over near the Meadows of Dan, the Mayberry and Bluemont churches. The third is an associate pastor there in Roanoke. Isabella has been called to be the associate pastor at Raleigh Court Presbyterian. And then there is a 4th pastor who is being called or being received by the presbytery to be the interim pastor at First Presbyterian South Roanoke. So the very first thing after the opening business that those 4 will be examined. I don't know how it used to be, but in today's presbytery meetings these days, each one will be asked to share their faith journey and talk a little bit about their call to their particular church. Then when they're examined by the committee, there's generally one question that the committee chooses to ask them on the floor of presbytery. And that's more not to trip anybody up. It's more to give people a chance to introduce themselves to the presbytery, to give the presbytery a chance to hear how they think. And that portion of the meeting has a full hour dedicated to it because it generally takes about 15 minutes per candidate to complete all the motions that go with that. We'll take a 5-minute break after the examinations, and we'll come back with the General Assembly report. You may know that the General Assembly met in June online via Zoom. And so our General Assembly commissioners decided to put a video presentation together in the spirit of what they experienced. After the meeting, that'll be posted on the website. For that 6 minutes, Dave, can phone users hear what's happening? Will they hear the video?
I'm pretty sure that that's the
Okay.
case. I tell you what, we can test it out right now. I'll bring up that video and then you can get a little preview. You have a special place, John. Let's see if this works.
I'm Pam Fireball, one of the commissioners to the General Assembly this year.
I can hear it.
Okay.
The General Assembly was held.
All right, that answers our question.
All right, good. After the General Assembly report, the Committee on Ministry will make its report. And you should know that in this meeting, because we're on Zoom and doing everything we can to make routine business a part of the consent agenda, much of the Committee on Ministry report is relegated to the consent agenda. It's mainly the terms of call for the incoming pastors and the motions that are necessary to make those happen. A part of, John, do you know what a commissioned pastor is?
Yes, I do.
At this meeting, we'll be commissioning one ruling elder to serve as a commissioned pastor at Old Brick Presbyterian Church, which is over in the New River Valley area near Radford. The mission study report that I alluded to, in the presbytery, when there are big ticket items, if you will, policies or procedures, there are always two readings. The first reading is usually the hefty one. People read it, respond to it, make amendments, and then at a subsequent meeting, the presbytery receives the reading for the second time and then votes to approve it or not. And so we're looking at, for the second time, a mission study design. If you would go on the presbytery website, Melissa McNair King has prepared a 10-minute intro that will tell you where we've been in the process. In essence, she takes 10 minutes to summarize what brings the report to the presbytery at this meeting. And between that and the actual mission study report that's in the presbytery package, you'll want to familiarize yourself with that, and you can see what's coming. The short version is, in the last 40 years, presbyteries have evolved. The presbyteries that our parents would have known were highly regulatory bodies. They made sure that they had policies and procedures in place, and the Committee on Ministry was there to enforce the policies and to make sure that everything was done correctly. Then the presbytery shifted to become more of a service provider, if you will, a program provider. That was a time when presbytery staffs were quite large. So you would have the general, or you'd have the associate presbyter for finance and stewardship, and you would have the associate presbyter for mission, and you would have the associate presbyter for youth and disciples, and so on. And presbyteries became very much a consumer-oriented ministry, with congregations as the consumer, and pastors too. Those were the height of presbytery budgets, and subsequent to that era, presbyteries have shifted, or I would say are shifting, to a more, what the popular term is, a relational model, and let's see what comes from the bottom up, rather than the presbytery mandating or creating programs. Idea is to connect churches and pastors to each other, and that out of those relationships and out of them addressing local problems together, they will be bringing to presbytery proposals for how to address neighborhood issues. I put it this way: I think the future is that we'll have relationships within the presbytery that are caring and responsive. At this moment, I think we tend to operate in silos. Each congregation is doing its own thing. Presbyteries were born out of a different impulse, and that was to help and support each other as the presbyteries began to be formed and were forming congregations. And so the bottom up is to be preferred. We'll have to be disciplined about making sure that we don't lay on activities for people that they're not seeking. My best example is how we used to do continuing education as a presbytery. We would sponsor weekend, or actually 2 or 3 day retreats for clergy, and everybody was invited. It was usually subsidized, and you would have 30 to 40 clergy attending this big all presbytery retreat. The last few years that we tried that here, we had 4, 5, maybe 10 participants. And several of those attended because they felt guilty because they didn't want the presbytery to be empty-handed. It's because people do continuing to get education differently now. And so we're trying to respond to the changing times that we live in. And the other piece, that the presbytery does have a regulatory function. And what we're trying to do is concentrate that authority in a very efficient way so that when new pastors come, for example, they're not examined 3 times as they are currently. Instead, they would be examined once by a group of folks that we trust, and then they would be introduced at a presbytery meeting. Similarly with mission funding, rather than the presbytery having 2 or 3 of its prioritized, prized, favored ministries, it would be funding ministries and missions that our congregations want to share jointly. Because again, what we do now is, I think Second Church, you're in the Dominican Republic, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
We are in the DR.
You're in the DR. Another church is in Haiti. Another church is in Guatemala. Well, currently, the Guatemalan mission gets the favor. In Guatemala, the presbytery collectively has a commitment of like $28,000 per year. In the past, Haiti was the favored mission. And I think it was when the presbyteries blended in '87 that maybe that transition took place. I'm not sure. But we're hoping to fund mission differently so that 4 or 5 congregations that want to work together on something will fund a piece of that because there's more ownership of it. So we have only 15 minutes dedicated to that because the presbytery has been in conversation about it for 3 years. We think people are ready to say, yeah, get on with it, right? A little bit later in the morning at 11:05, another major piece of business will be presented to the presbytery. And that is the General Presbyter Search Committee is concluding its work and bringing a recommendation to the presbytery for the next general presbyter. I happen to be that person. When I first came to the presbytery, I had transitional experience in congregations, but they wanted to make sure that when the time came, if I was interested and the presbytery was interested, they wanted to leave the door open that I could apply. And the provision was that I could apply as long as there was an open national search. And so there was, and personally, I'm satisfied that it was thorough and competitive, so that they weren't saying, oh, geez, we got to have Carl again, you know? So I'll be absent for that part of the meeting, and that committee will give its recommendation, along with terms of call and those kinds of things. The mission committee is bringing a video presentation. We had originally lined up for in-person. The General Assembly coordinator for South Sudan, or actually part of the African continent, but they were bringing a focus on South Sudan and the Presbyterian Church there. The General Assembly has frozen all travel for General Assembly staff, so they have put together a video presentation around South Sudan. And our own mission committee, there's some folks here invested in exploring that for the presbytery. And so they'll come and do that. And I think they have 20 to 25 minutes to do their part. And then the final major business is a report by the trustees. This is a late addition. 3 weeks ago, a congregation approached the trustees and whether we would consider selling the current location of the presbytery office to them. The presbytery moved into the property that we're in now 2.5 years ago because Covenant Presbyterian Church closed. So we came as a temporary move to be in this building. It was on the market for a year, and we had not a nibble except one, and that was from, I think, Holiday Inn or some major hotel chain that wanted to buy the property. And we took too long to deliberate, which is the Presbyterian way, and they withdrew the offer. So the 3 weeks ago, we were approached, and that has all moved fairly rapidly. So the trustees are asking for permission to execute a sale of this property. When the church closed, it was their hope that the presbytery property here would continue to be used as for a worshiping body. And that's who wants to buy it. It's a independent congregation. They're called Providence Church. They have a Presbyterian form of government, roughly, but they have a bunch of kids and homeschooled, so they're excited about the layout of the building and the sanctuary and so forth. And that'll be the last big item of the day. John, I never know what items of a Presbyterian agenda are going to garner the most debate or conversation. And every time I think I can predict, I'm utterly wrong. So those are the big things to come along for us on Saturday, and we shall see. Sometimes I think there are items that'll take 30 minutes and they take 5. And there are the things that I think will take 5 minutes that take 45. So bring your riding boots and we'll see where the horse takes us. Any questions?
Not a one. No, I think it was very well explained.
All right, John. Supporting documents are all in that packet, and I read them from my iPad, so it's all in a PDF file, and you'll be able to follow along. And I hope you're following along from the beach or somewhere.
Hopefully we'll get there.
All right. Well, best wishes with that. Well, John, that's
okay.
my friend.
Well, thank you so much for your time this evening. I appreciate your making yourselves available.
You bet.
And we'll look forward to convening on Saturday morning. What the meeting agenda, it looks like there was a window of time in which to sign in. What is the drop dead kickoff?
The drop dead kickoff is at 9 o'clock, and you can begin entering the meeting. Will be open at 8:30.
Okay, wonderful.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
All right, take care and have a good week, John.
Thanks, John.
Well, thank you so much for your time again.
All right, bye-bye now.